Welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast, the resource for transitional and experienced genealogists who want to create a successful business. I'm your host, Miriam Pierre-Louis. Here you'll learn from professionals all around the world who work in the field of genealogy. Are you ready to get started? Then let's get going. This podcast is sponsored in part by the Association of Professional Genealogists. You can find out more about them at www.apgen.org. Welcome to episode 28 of the Genealogy Professional Podcast. Today we head west to California to chat with genealogist Ron Arons. Ron, welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast.
Good morning.
Let's get started by having you tell us about yourself and give us an overview of your genealogy business.
Thanks for the opportunity to be on this podcast. I've been doing genealogy for about 20 years, and I have to say I got into genealogy for all the wrong reasons. Not something I actually chose. I was sort of forced into it. I lost both of my parents to cancer somewhere between 21 and 23 years ago, and I found myself in a very deep depression, and my brother and I had a big task to go to our home in New York where we were raised and go through what was left in that house. And one of the things I found was a family tree that my father had shown me when I was in college, and quite honestly at that time I was not ready for genealogy, and I didn't have the heart to tell my father, gee, this is boring, but having lost both of my parents to cancer, this tree had a new meaning for me, and I took what my father had done and I ran with it. So I started researching not only his side of the family, but my mother's side of the family, and I quickly discovered that there were some interesting secrets on my mother's side of the family, including the fact that my great-grandfather, my mother's grandfather, had served time in the famous New York prison known as Sing Sing. And it was such a great story that I ran with it. And I actually wanted to write a book about this story. It was terribly funny, and my journey to uncover the truth about this story was equally funny. And I learned in the book publishing world that in order to sell a book, you have to have something known as a platform, and that means an expertise in some field. So I was determined to build a platform, and that included becoming a speaker and speaking about this topic and speaking about criminals who served time in Sing Sing as my topic of expertise. So I became a good researcher. I became a much better speaker, and that's what I do today. I'm an author. I'm a speaker. I do take clients on occasion, but that's not my primary focus. I'm primarily a speaker and an author.
When you were writing this book, The Jews of Sing Sing, did you imagine at that point that you would keep going with this interest? Or, because it seems like from what you said that the goal was to write the book and that you chose a platform. Did you really at that point say, wow, I'm just going to devote the whole rest of my life to this?
I had no idea where this would take me, and I have to say that I've been on a wild journey ever since. I really just had the short-term focus of publishing this book. Truly, it's been a great journey, and it's taken me places I never would have imagined going. So I'm absolutely thrilled. I did not know I would become not only an expert about Jewish criminals in New York who served time in Sing Sing, but then I became an expert on researching criminals across the country, and it has led to other things. So it has evolved. And I guess one of the things I'm most surprised about is that even though I've been researching my great-grandfather, the criminal, for 15 to 20 years, I'm still learning about him. There are more and more records that become available every year. And just a couple of months ago, there was an announcement that the Brooklyn Public Library had made more years available for the Brooklyn Daily Eagle newspaper available online, keyword searchable, and I found yet another article about my great-grandfather. So despite my feeling that I've researched his life as much as I can, I'm always surprised that there are new records that become available, and I'm always learning more about his life. So this journey has been remarkable on so many different fronts. I'm doing many more things than I ever would have expected or planned, and I'm still learning about my great-grandfather, who I just started to research 15 to 20 years ago, but I'm still learning about him after all this time.
So what were you doing before you wrote this book and before you decided to dive into this alternative career? What were you doing for work?
I was in the high-tech world. I did marketing for many big-name companies and some smaller ones. I worked for Texas Instruments right after I got out of graduate school. I worked for a company in Los Angeles called Ashton-Tate, which made a popular personal computer database called DBase. I worked for another database software company in Berkeley called Sybase, and for a number of other software companies throughout Silicon Valley. And I guess when the dot-com bubble burst, I was laid off, and I decided that there was this book that I wanted to write, and I focused my attention on that project. It took many, many years to write my first book, The Jews of Sing Sing, but I was very happy to do it, and it got me on the map as an author.
So once the book was written and that the project is done, you're making sales, you've got your whole life ahead of you, and now you have to keep going with some sort of profession in this new realm. What did you do to prepare yourself? What did you do to say, okay, I've got to have money coming in beyond just this book? Did you, in terms of genealogy or historical research, did you do anything from an educational point of view? And also, it sounds like you had some good business skills from your high-tech career, but what kind of business skills did you have to learn as well?
One of the things I had to learn was to be a better speaker, and I have to say that for the longest time, even though I was in the business world, I probably was never in a position where I had an opportunity to speak to more than 10 or so people at any given time. I would go into sales situations, being a marketeer myself, and speak to 10 people, and I was comfortable with that. I was not getting comfortable getting up in front of a large audience, more than 25 people. I never dreamed I could speak in front of 400, 500, 700 people. So going to conferences, going to bigger venues where I could speak in front of larger audiences was a big help to me. And my first opportunity to do that was the International Jewish Genealogy Conference in 2001, which was held in London. And I got up in front of 90 people, and I was very scared. And 2 minutes into my talk about my great-grandfather's story and my journey to learn more about him, people were laughing, people were falling out of their chairs, and it was a remarkable experience. What was even more remarkable was the feedback I got several days later. 12 people came up to me in a completely unsolicited manner and told me that I had to repeat this story, my presentation, back in the States. People told me it was the best talk at the conference, and I was overwhelmed. I really had no idea I could have this impact on people. So that really turbocharged my speaking career and made me more comfortable as a speaker. So that's probably the thing that helped me the most going forward, was to become a better speaker.
In terms of researching for the book, did you already have the skills necessary, or did you have to take some courses along the way to kind of propel you to solving the mystery?
I have to answer that question by saying that I am a self-starter. I'm self-taught. So I learned by doing. I just wanted to find out more about my great-grandfather, everything I could understand about him. So I went looking for all sorts of records, not only here in the United States, but in England. And I even went to England. I went around England after the International Jewish Genealogy Conference and followed the footsteps of my great-grandfather. So I learned by doing. I just tried to think of what records could I possibly find about him to explain his life. And in a similar fashion, I did that with a dozen other Jewish criminals that I wrote about in my book as mini biographies. So I am definitely a self-starter. I learned by doing. I did not take any courses. I just learned by doing.
Tell us what skills specifically you brought to your new career from your previous profession and how they helped you.
Certainly, I'll go back to my college and graduate school days. I learned engineering in college. I studied business in graduate school. Those skills I applied to various marketing positions in the high-tech world. So solving real-world business problems using analytical skills certainly helped me become a good genealogist, just trying to analyze problems, figure out what's missing, trying to figure out where I had to go. Definitely being a self-starter, it helped to have the analytical skills and the motivation to find out answers to questions. So I think it was a natural progression from what I had done before.
Now, you already mentioned that you lacked speaking skills, but luckily that turned out to be a rather intuitive thing for you. Did you have other skills that you lacked that you had to work harder to sort of practice at or learn in terms of just running your business?
The other way to answer your question is to say that I had always worked for big companies, so this is the first time I was on my own. So trying to be motivated to get up in the morning and do something, that has been something to learn. So just being on one's own, you have to take the time to network with people, so finding out where to contact people, learn the important people to contact and what to say to them, how to say that to them. Being a one-person operation is definitely a different position than working for a larger company. So that was an adjustment.
So, but give us an example of some of the things you had to change. Let's get more specific. So you had to learn to network. What else did you have to do? It's a really big change going from a big company to one person.
Well, I have to be organized. I guess I have to lay out a plan for how I'm going to conduct my business. So being part of a bigger corporation, you don't have to worry about that as much. You have a specialty, a functional area that you work in. As a sole practitioner, you have to do everything. So really concentrating on all of that, and then I guess time management. How do you figure out where you put your efforts, and how do you maximize your time to get everything done you need to get done? So you are, as a solo practitioner, in charge of everything. So you have to figure out what are the most important things and how you get all of them done in the given time frame that you have. So time management is a very important issue.
With all the new things that you had to learn with starting a new business and a new discipline, what was the hardest part of starting a genealogy business?
Establishing a reputation, and I worked really hard in just laying the foundation, getting organizations to have me as a speaker. I put together speaker kits, and those speaker kits grew over time, so I would do some talks for free just to get exposure. One example is speaking at Temple Emmanuel, the largest congregation, Jewish organization in America. It's on Fifth Avenue in New York, and somehow I found my way to get a speaking gig in that synagogue, and that helped build my resume. So resume building is something that's very important and something that you have to do, not for a fee initially, just to get events that you can put on your resume and build and grow from there. So you have to understand, or at least I thought I had to understand, that I had to do things for free just to get my name out there, get a reputation, get the experience so that I can build upon that and then tell the next organization that, look, this is what I've done before, this is what I can do for you.
From that particular speaking engagement, which aspect helped you the most? The reputation of the temple nationally or the quantity of people that led to greater exposure?
I think the answer is a combination of two, but I'd say the reputation of the organization was more important than necessarily the number of people that I spoke to, but they did go hand in hand, and typically there is a correlation between those two things. In this instance, it was a very well-known congregation that would allow me to get speaking gigs at congregations across the United States. That led me to get speaking gigs at Jewish community centers across the United States. So every little bit helps, and it just builds and builds and builds. So you start small, and you build, and it just grows. But you have to start small, work really hard to get those initial gigs, and then work from there. But it builds, and it can be done, even though it seems daunting at first. So I guess that's another issue, is just not to be afraid and just go out and do and get the job done and build and build and build.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps if you throw caution to the wind and fear to the wind and just go forward and see what happens when you own your own business. Definitely good quality. Can you share a specific story of an obstacle you encountered early in your career and how you worked around it. Maybe this could be when you started taking clients and, it could just be a hiccup along the way and you said, oh, I didn't realize I would have to deal with that, and then you had to solve that problem. Can you give us an example?
Well, I'll go back to the story of my speaking at the conference in London. I really had to fight hard to get into this conference because I had very little experience. I had spoken to my local genealogical society in the San Francisco Bay Area, but I made a good case as to why I should speak at this conference, and one of the ways I did that was to say that my story was not only funny, inspirational, but also had to do with finding records in England, even though I was living in California. So I found a small opening that I could use to get into that conference. And that really was a big turning point in my genealogical career, just to get that gig, because it was an international conference that led to so many other speaking opportunities. And just getting that one conference under my belt did so many things that built up my confidence, because people came up to me and told me that I had done such a good job, or they thought I had done such a good job that they wanted me to do this all over again in the United States. And it was just something I could put on my resume to say, see, I've spoken at big conferences, not only locally or regionally, but internationally. It was a big feather in my cap that I really could run with and do many more big things from there. It was a true turning point in my career, but I had to work hard to find that opening, to figure out how I could get into that conference. And then once I did, it really helped my career.
When you made that persuasive argument, were you doing it when you submitted your paperwork, or did you contact some of the coordinators of the conference afterwards specifically to say, hey, this is why you should have me?
I made a good argument that I had done research from afar. Also, 13 years ago, I was using the Internet when not too many people were. And there were some records that I used over the Internet when very few people were doing this. So this actually led also to an article in the Jewish genealogy journal called Avotenu. I wrote an article about how to do British research from afar using the Internet, which was truly revolutionary 13 years ago. People do it left and right today, but not too many people were doing that way back when. So I think I set myself apart by doing something that no one else was doing at the time, or very few people knew how to do at the time. And I had done a lot of research. Fortunately, the stars lined up properly, and I found many records about my family using the Internet 13 years ago when very few people were doing that.
So you didn't have to contact them individually. You were able to lay out that argument in your proposal.
That's correct.
Okay, great. And at what point did you start taking clients?
I think I probably took clients even before I became a better speaker. So I do that. I have done that, but I don't make that a major point of my business. I'm more of a speaker, and I have many books that I want to write. So I will take clients. I definitely have a reputation as being an expert in researching criminal ancestors, and people know about that from my website, from my talks, from my books, from just word of mouth. So people do contact me about researching criminals, and I help some. My time is very precious, so I don't take on many clients to do that, but if people want to pay for serious money for my time, I will take client time, but that's not the primary focus of my business. The primary focus is to be a speaker and to write books.
So how long was it after your first book that you started writing the second book?
The first book actually took me 10 years to write. So the first book came out in 2008, and then about 3 years later, I had accumulated more experience in researching criminals not only in New York, but across the country. I had developed a presentation with a cohort of mine about the two women who inspired the Broadway musical Chicago. It's actually based on the life of two pretty amazing women. And in that project, I learned about criminal records in Illinois and California. So I expanded my knowledge base of criminal records and actually had spoken to a big genealogy company about doing a consulting project for them to understand where criminal records were across the country. And it was supposed to lead to a consulting contract, but it did not. And I decided to go forward and turn that into a book. And I turned that book around in less than half a year. So that book came out in 2011, and that book project went very quickly.
And that book is called Wanted, U.S. Criminal Records, Sources and Research Methodology. And just to give people an idea of what this book is like, there's a chapter for each state, and it goes through all the different criminal records for each state and gives some information on executions, Department of Corrections, gives websites. It's kind of a neat reference tool. And if you're the type of researcher who is going into different states in your research, either for clients or for new families that you uncover, it's kind of cool that you can just use this one reference for the whole United States. So that's it's very nicely formatted. It's really easy to read.
The fact remains that most criminal records have not been digitized or indexed or put on the Internet. The vast majority of historical criminal records are in repositories somewhere across the country, and this book makes it easy to figure out where those records are across the country. You have to probably go somewhere to find them, but they are available. Many, many records are available.
When you talk to people at conferences and such, are they typically surprised to find a criminal in their ancestry? Or are there people who are looking for somebody with a naughty streak?
I think people fall into all types of buckets. So you've mentioned two. I think a good percentage of people understand that every family has a black sheep, whether they're a criminal or in prison or not. And some people decide not to deal with it. They don't want to be bothered by it. They say, oh, I have all white sheep in my family. I don't have a single criminal in my family. But I would imagine if they search hard and far enough that they would find something. Most families have some juicy story in their background to research. And if you simply look at the numbers, there have been millions upon millions upon millions of Americans who have been incarcerated over the years. That's not even counting criminals who may have not have been caught or somehow got off and did not serve time somehow. There are just millions of ancestors and people out there who are criminals. So the odds are very high that each and every one of us has a criminal in our family somewhere.
You've just come out with a new book, hot off the press, and this is called Mind Maps for Genealogy, Enhanced Research Planning, Correlation, and Analysis. What is this all about? What are mind maps, and how are people going to use them for genealogy?
So a mind map is a graphical outlining tool or a graphical organizing tool, and typically people use mind maps to brainstorm or do creative thinking or to think out of the box. So typically you start with a central topic or theme in the center of a piece of paper, or in this case with some software that does this digitally. Then you have branches, or what's called in the mind mapping world as nodes, that are one level out from the central topic. Think of an outline that you use in high school to write a paper. There are many different levels of the outline. You can have what are called children nodes, and then grandchildren nodes, and so on. You can have multiple different layers of a mind map, and it's graphical. And not only do you have these different levels, but what I found useful is to draw lines across these different branches of this mind map, and you can do many different things. Once again, they're typically used for creative thinking, brainstorming. People have talked about using these mind maps for planning your research, but they can also be used for logging your research. What I found to be really exciting is to do very complicated correlations and analyses of your problems. And I found that the more difficult the problem, the more powerful these mind maps become, and they really make things come alive. If you're a visual person, these are much more exciting, much more illuminating than text, narrative, tables, bullet lists. For me, they just help me solve a couple of problems that have been haunting me for 15 years, and I have been talking about mind maps for years, putting them in my various presentations. But in December of last year and January of this year, I used mind maps, and they just lit up my brain, and my brain was on fire, and I solved two problems that I've been thinking of for years and years and years in just those 2 months. And I thought, this is so powerful. I have to write about this. I have to write a book. I have to let other people get excited and experience this and become better researchers, just as I had. I had thought of myself as a researcher, but mind maps elevated my skill set to levels I just could not have imagined before. I'm very excited about this.
So if I were to oversimplify mind mapping, could I say that it's a visual solution for problem solving?
That is a great not an oversimplification, a simplification of what I just said, yes.
I don't know if what I do is mind mapping, but I have a talk where I encourage researchers to review their research, and I do all these like visual ways of reviewing their research, which I think is on the road, but probably not quite to the level that you're talking about. So I'm really excited about learning more about this mind mapping.
In the book, I have some pretty wild examples. They are rather large mind maps, and they just help me think so clearly, tying 12, 20 different documents together in a visual way. It just helped me think about it. It helped me see what information I had, what information lined up, what information did not line up, what actions I had to take next because of what I had or did not have. It really made it simple to see what was going on with this problem, and I solved the problem so quickly, it was mind-boggling.
Do you think it's better to use mind mapping software, or is it as effective just to use pen and paper?
I think it's certainly acceptable to start with a piece of paper and a pen, and I think I do that sometimes. What's nice about the software is that you can move things around and change things, so if you make a mistake, you don't have to start from scratch. There's also a concept of folding, so you can hide or unhide various parts of the map. If you build a big map, you don't have to look at all of it at the same time. You can fold up parts of it and put it away, put it aside. A mind map also allows you to add an image. So if you want to look at a person or a document that you found about that person, you can add that as well. There are just many different capabilities of these mind mapping tools, and there are many of them. There are at least 30 products or services that I found that do virtually the same thing. So some are for free, some you have to pay for. Some work on Macs, some work on PCs, some work on iPads, others on Android, some are web-based. So they're all different types of mind mapping products and services available. I do concentrate on two of them, which work on PCs and Macs, and, oh, by the way, they're free. They are called FreeMind and XMind, and they're freely downloadable from the Internet.
One of the other things I like just from glancing through your book is that you can color code the mind maps. So I imagine that using the software programs, makes it really easy to do that. I think visually It just really helps you differentiate between.
Absolutely. You could use crayons if you want, but it's really nice to have a mind mapping tool that you can color the text, you can color the background, you can color the lines. There are many different options, and you come up with the way you want to use color or the way you want to build your map. There is no set way to use this tool. I give guidelines on how they worked for me, and I have a suggested methodology for how to use them, but feel free to use this tool any which way you want. I'm certainly not dogmatic about this. This is a great generic tool, and you can use it not only for genealogy, but other parts of your life. If you want to plan a trip or organize your daily life, a mind map can be used for virtually anything. It's not just for genealogy, but I think it's a wonderful, powerful tool to help increase your skill level doing genealogy.
It sounds like a great tool to use. Ron, what is the most fun project that you've ever worked on that you can share with us? And this could be a writing project, it can be a speaking project, or it could be a client project.
Well, I've sort of been obsessed with learning more about my great-grandfather for nearly 20 years now, and as much as I thought it would stop at some point, I still go back and look every now and then to see what new things are available. And as I think I mentioned earlier in this interview, just a couple of months ago, I found another article about my great-grandfather. Even though he was sent away to Sing Sing for bigamy in 1897, somehow he got to be a New York State income tax auditor, and by 1925 he was accused of attempted extortion, and I wondered how in the world did he get a job as a New York State income tax auditor after he'd served time in Sing Sing. And just a couple of months ago I found this Brooklyn Daily Eagle newspaper article online that showed that he passed the civil service exam in 1921. So even though I'm 15, 20 years into researching this guy, I'm still learning, and I don't know whether I believe in spirits that are helping me. I am a spiritual person, but this story continues to unfold despite the fact that I've worked on it for 15, 20 years and think I've done everything I can. I'm always surprised that there are new things available that I find out about him to increase my knowledge of the story.
Let's take a quick break to hear a message from the Association of Professional Genealogists.
My name is Harold Henderson. I've been an APG member since 2007, and I serve on its board. You don't have to already be a professional to join APG. It's a great place to go when you are beginning to take genealogy more seriously and want to find others who do. There are plenty of chances to learn and ways to volunteer. My favorite is the members-only mailing list for sharing information and asking for help. Learn more about APG at www.apgen.org.
All right, Ron, we are going to shake up the tempo a little bit now. We're going to make things a little faster, and we are going to enter the lightning round. Are you ready?
I think so.
Okay. What was the one thing you were most afraid of in starting your business?
I think I'll go back to getting up in front of a large audience. I was truly a nervous speaker, and once I got up in front of 90 people and they started laughing and I understood that I had the ability to have an impact on people, that was a life changer. But I was truly nervous at that moment to get up in front of 90 people.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
I think the best advice is to follow your passion, and certainly I have been passionate about learning about my great-grandfather, writing a book about him, writing other books. I am a passionate person, so my advice to other people is to find your passion and get your juices flowing, and things will go well.
What is one specific action listeners can take in the next 24 hours to help them transition into a genealogy career?
I'm going to repeat my answer and just follow your passion. Find out what you're good at, what you're passionate about, and I think those go hand in hand. If you're passionate about something, you'll be better at it, you'll get better at it, and conversely, if you're good about something, you're probably passionate about it. So they go hand in hand. Find out what your passion is, find out what your skills are that work with your passion, and go from there.
What if somebody doesn't know what their passion is? What if they're struggling to find that? Do you have any suggestions for how they can tease that out?
I think it's just what makes you happy. What gets you going in the morning. Well, what do you like to do? What do you get satisfaction from?
Do you have a productivity tool or an app that you love that you can share with the audience?
We talked about mind maps. I just am truly in love with mind maps, and I think I'm going to be using them in my life more outside of the genealogy world. They've just helped me so much solving very difficult problems, and I see them being used for a number of different things.
What were the two names of those ones you mentioned before?
FreeMind, FreeMind is one of them. That's the one I use the most. It's very efficient with space. The other is called Xmind. That's Xmind, and you can Google those two tools, FreeMind, Xmind. They'll come up right away.
What is your preferred social media channel?
I use Facebook. Mm-hmm. I'm a Facebook person. I have a Twitter account, but I don't use that nearly as often.
If you can recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be?
Oh, boy. Can I recommend my own book?
No, because you've already
recommend my own book.
No, you've already we've already mentioned those. You've got to recommend something else. Maybe something that has to do with Jewish genealogy, something to do with New York or immigration? What's one of the books that's helped you a lot in making your books?
Well, I heard a speaker last year, I believe. His name is Dan Ariely. It's Danariely. He's a professor of economics at Duke University, and he wrote a book called The Honest Truth About Dishonesty. And he truly thinks out of the box. And I enjoy reading his book. That helped me understand a little bit more about how and why people think in a criminal manner. So that added to my understanding of why criminals act the way they do. And he's a very funny person, and his studies, his research is truly amazing. So that's a book I've read in the past couple of years that has been truly wonderful.
See, that's a perfect book, and it just really rounds out the whole discussion. All right, let's do a tips from the pro, with you, of course, being the pro. Give us 3 quick tips about mind mapping to help people get started, somebody who hasn't used mind mapping before. Give us 3 steps that they can take right at the beginning.
Well, I would first start with a piece of paper and a pen and just start with a central concept or theme. What's the problem you want to solve or the topic you want to explore? And then think about the various aspects of that topic or problem you want to solve. From there, think about how you can break down into its various different components. What makes up this topic? Or if I'm thinking about one person, what are the various parts of this person's life I want to explore? Is it the various different documents that I want to collect about him or her? Or is it the various different aspects of this person's life, their siblings, their family, their occupations, the locations where they lived, their migration? What do you want to find out about this person? And then go one layer deeper than that for each of these different subtopics. What do you want to find out or think you want to find out? I would definitely download one of these tools and start playing with it and just have fun.
Ron, give our audience one parting piece of advice and then tell us how we can get in contact with you.
So, one parting piece of advice, just do it. I think to steal a line from Nike, just find your passion and do it. People can contact me through my website. That's ronarons.com. That's RONARONS.com. And I have a contact page on my website. You can contact me that way.
Ron Arons, thank you so much for coming on the Genealogy Professional Podcast today.
Thank you very much.
Well, today we learned about the really unusual story of Ron Arons and how he got started in genealogy. I think the way he went about it's really different from most of us. He had an idea from a book, and then that led him into the field of genealogy as opposed to the other way around, which is really different. And it just goes to show you that people come to genealogy from all different backgrounds and from all different ways. And Ron had lots of really interesting things to talk about. I mean, everything about Ron is different, from focusing on black sheep and criminals to mind mapping, which is a really neat way to look at how to analyze your research and how to analyze anything visually, which definitely we should all look into that a little bit more. Some takeaways that are important for us to all consider that Ron talked about, such as building your reputation and going the extra mile to get a speaking engagement, and how successful he was after that first speaking engagement. That was really pivotal for him because it was his first time speaking. He wasn't sure if he could do it, and it turns out he did it really well. Now, I think he might have been a little lucky and perhaps naturally inclined to public speaking. I think it took me a lot longer, and perhaps some of you might take a little bit more longer to get comfortable with public speaking. But definitely, the things he talked about are important things for us to consider. And he also talked about time management and how he had to grapple with that when he started his business. I think for our action item this week, we want to focus in on the whole mind mapping thing. I think this is probably a new area for most of us. And let's just spend half an hour this week and try out that software. Go to one of the two that he mentioned and the links will be in the show notes, and you can test them out and see what this whole mind mapping thing is all about. I think it's important that we take time during our week to explore new tools that can help us solve problems and increase our productivity. So I think that's a great action item for this week. So if you don't know anything about mind mapping, let's check it out. Let's do it together, because I have to do it too. I really don't know anything about mind mapping tools, and I need to find out, is this a tool that can help me? Until next week, so long.